Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome Meredithe McNamara. She's a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist. Her KevinMD article that she co-wrote is titled "The Current Political Climate is Leaving Youth and Their Physicians Behind." Meredithe, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin.
So we'll get into the article in a little bit. First off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Wow, briefly. So I'm the oldest of 8. I come from a huge family. I've always been around kids. And as I got older, they got older. And I found myself just loving being around teenagers. I kind of underwent like a massive shift in my career plans in residency and decided that I only wanted to care for teens, despite having kind of thought that I was going to be a baby doctor. Really, it was my clinical experiences in the South Side of Chicago, dealing with marginalized and vulnerable youth, that really struck a chord with me. So I have done advocacy and research work in gun violence prevention, in improving safety climates in schools. But within the past year or so, since I took my position at Yale, the political climate around transgender youth has just become something like nothing we've ever seen before. And I have become very concerned that trans youth are kind of like canaries in a coal mine, and that they signal an entry point for a cascade of dangerous interference into standard healthcare. So I co-founded an initiative with a law professor and a friend, Ann Alstott, and that initiative is called the Integrity Project. So now I think that my career is going to be about infusing health policy with scientific integrity standards. And we can talk more about what that means, but that is probably the most galvanizing realization I've had in all of my training and all of my postgraduate years.
So let's get into your article. The current political climate is leaving youth and their physicians behind. But before you do, just give us some context. Give us a little bit of a background of what is adolescent medicine and a little bit of a background about the specialty.
So I want all your listeners to know that adolescent medicine is the greatest field of all, first and foremost. I endorse it highly. There are no hard and fast definitions of adolescence either. So teens need all different types of things. They need, concrete areas of clinical care like sexual and reproductive health. They need mental health services. They need substance use counseling. They have growth and development issues. But what they also really need is a developmentally focused, youth-friendly approach to all aspects of their care. One of the things that I love about adolescent medicine is that it's not a physician-driven field. We train alongside nutritionists and social workers and nurse practitioners and physician's assistants in fellowship programs, because youth get care in a variety of ways, in a variety of settings, and it's our job to make that care more accessible. So the final thing I'll just say about this is that the other thing that I think adolescent medicine physicians and their colleagues do is we advocate for our patients. Because we love our patients wholeheartedly, we make really good advocates for them. And youth are historically pathologized, scapegoated, and thrown under the bus when it comes to social policies. So it's our job to speak up for their needs.
All right. Let's talk about your KevinMD article. The current political climate is leaving youth and their physicians behind. How did your article come together?
Well, Dr. Waters is my co-author, and he is an assistant program director of the fellowship program at Children's National in DC. He and I met at a conference, and we, had a very serious discussion about the climate that our patients are facing. We noted that match day numbers in pediatrics were among the lowest that they'd been in years. And anything that stems the flow of pediatricians in this country hurts kids, and it cripples pediatric subspecialties. So we don't want to be kind of like junior faculty inheriting our field and finding ourselves in several years far less resourced than we already are. So we decided to write about the things that we're seeing on the ground, the harassment and vilification that our colleagues are facing in states where legal intrusion is threatening standard healthcare for youth. And we wanted to tie it into just kind of an expression of advocacy for your readers about just how worthy our patients are of protecting.
So you mentioned that you wanted to share stories about what you're seeing on the ground. Tell us some of those stories.
Well, within the past 18 months or so, a cascade of bans on gender affirming care for trans youth have ripped through state legislatures in this country. And what that has done, those bans, by the way, are not really based on anything scientifically provable or real, and in many cases based on outright bad information about standard healthcare for trans youth. What those bans have done is given cover and excused the harassment of physicians who provide this care. Now, I don't want anyone to think that I'm here to exclusively talk about how physicians are harassed. I want people to know that if physicians, pediatricians are getting harassing emails, bomb threats to their hospitals, threatening and harassing protests at their clinics, that if that's going on, then the experience of our patients these days has to be so much worse. So we wanted to call attention to that because we're living in an unprecedented time where physician experts in all fields are facing a really concerning level of distrust and hate from certain loud minorities. But I'm just worried about what that means for years to come.
So you're at a teaching institution, and I'm sure that you have contact with medical students. Are these political issues and the harassment and the threats, are they at the forefront of these medical students' minds as they're choosing specialties?
I would say that they're much more in the forefront of their minds than they are in the people that teach them. And, that's also a nice parallel to why I just love my field so much. It's often the younger people, the more junior people that have insights that deserve to be paid attention to. Now, I've seen two things. I've seen the political climate be galvanizing and inspiring. It makes people want to step up and join the fight. And then I've also seen people think, I don't want a life where I'm a political target. I'd rather pursue something that I don't think anyone's going to object to. However, I don't think there's a limit to where this political interference will stop. If it's allowed to fly in gender affirming care, in reproductive health, in HIV prevention, I really can't imagine that there's a point at which biased political actors back off. And I think that the students I work with know that.
Now, you mentioned at the latest match, the pediatric numbers were down. Give us a sense of the context and some of those numbers. How dire is the situation?
I don't think it's imminently dire. I think this is anytime you see a trend in the early phases, you've got to call it out, analyze it, talk about it. There are parts of the country where it is hard to get access to pediatric care. So notably, a hospital in Idaho had to shut down their labor and delivery services because they couldn't get pediatricians to staff deliveries and they couldn't get OBGYNs to care for expecting moms. That's the sort of thing that we're seeing in certain places in the country, but we got to talk about it and we have to look at why that's going on rather than fall into crisis mode and be, managing situations that harm people on a large scale. So I'm not worried about today. I'm worried about tomorrow's tomorrow.
So, as it relates to your field of adolescent medicine, so assuming that this trend of fewer pediatricians, how's that going to affect adolescent medicine?
Well, all pediatric subspecialties are experiencing workforce shortages. In adolescent medicine in particular, there are something like 25 states where there is less than one provider per 100,000 pediatric patients. Now, all the things that I listed off that we do, you can imagine that there are adolescents everywhere that need that type of care. So adolescent medicine physicians are charged not only with providing that care, but with also building capacity in general pediatric workforces to provide that as well. And I'm worried that as legal interference expands throughout the country, if it goes unchallenged, that those gaps in care will widen. And the final problem, which deserves perhaps the most attention, is the geographic gaps in care. So if you look at bans on gender affirming care, it's often in places where there are very few or no adolescent medicine providers. And if we start to see this exodus of relatively small field in pediatric subspecialties to states where care is preserved, then it's going to create this massive discrepancy in safe and receptive clinical climates for youth. And I don't want to see two categories of states in this country, or I don't want to see a reality where your state is your social determinant of health. So that's why Dr. Waters and I felt compelled to write this and to kind of sound the alarm.
We're talking to Meredithe McNamara. She's a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist. Her KevinMD article that she co-wrote is titled "The Current Political Climate is Leaving Youth and Their Physicians Behind." Meredithe, let's talk about a path forward. So clearly you drew attention to this on your KevinMD piece and on this podcast. What are the things that can physicians do to help stem the tide?
Well, all physicians have to understand the health needs of some of the most marginalized patients we all care for. I don't care what your specialty is, you do take care of transgender people. And knowing the basics goes a long way in destigmatizing their health needs, their identities, and making the world safer for them. So first and foremost, I would say learn a little bit about gender affirming care and transgender people. Make your clinics safe spaces. The knowledge gaps that even medical students have when it comes to transgender people are really concerning. And we are doing work to fill those gaps, but we need to do it quickly because transgender people are being targeted on a political scale that we have never seen before in this country. Families are literally picking up and leaving their homes in states that they've lived in their whole lives so that their kids can get healthcare somewhere safe. American refugees on American soil, never heard of that before. So awareness in the medical community is paramount. Advocacy is also huge. I mean, physicians are natural advocates because we see the minutia, we see what's going on the ground, and we know what needs to be better. And the final thing I would say is we all need to steel ourselves for the reality of the climates that we advocate in. This is not in my piece, but I testified in a congressional hearing a couple of weeks ago about an amendment to the CHGME Reauthorization Act, which provides reauthorized funding for pediatrics residents. Unfortunately, a Republican congressman amended the bill to defund programs that care for trans youth. And while that seems crazy, why, there's no way that millions of dollars would suddenly be deprived of children's hospitals to fund peds residents. We shouldn't even have to think about that reality to begin with. My testimony against that bill has led to harassment in basically every way you can imagine. And I'm not a victim. I am frustrated by it. It is certainly disheartening, but I have no right to be surprised by it. We live in an era where a loud minority of people are angry at physicians and have a lot of fear. And I would just encourage your listeners who are looking to engage in advocacy to kind of know that that's going on, to not be surprised, and to develop networks of mutual support. Because it's my colleagues in red states who do this care every day. It's the people who I know and respect who kind of get me through these tough moments. And I do genuinely believe that what's right and good for our patients will prevail in the end.
What are some things that physicians can do to prepare themselves for the harassment?
Talk to each other about it. I mean, I think we've got to build networks of mutual support. It's not personal. It's more of just an indicator of the climate that we live in. It's the post-COVID world. And there are very practical things that you can do as well. There's a really great nonprofit, actually, that protects faculty-free speech, which I can send you some information on, and you can link it in your notes. But academics have been dealing with this for a long time in various areas. And the fact that physicians deal with it too now just means that we need to learn from our peers in other fields.
And my final question, Meredith, tell us some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
I want everyone to be hopeful. I think that there is a spectrum of how we all view reality. You know, there's tragic optimism, there is toxic positivity, and then there's abject despair. And I would like us to follow along the tragic optimism point of view, because we have to be honest about what's hard, but we have to be optimistic that things will be okay if we do something about it.
Meredith, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for coming on the show.